What's happened over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months, and how is that going to impact all of us around the world?
Well, if you think of the U.S. as setting the tone economically and maybe even culturally for the West, there's definitely a reversion away from people feel that quote unquote wokeism, and I don't like to use that word, but I'll use it here, was this sort of overcorrection to systemic racism, and that it began to cause more damage than it was, um, or cause more problems than it was solving. And I think there's been a serious kind of lurch back, if you will, whether it's executive actions, declaring the border a state of emergency, stuff around saying that gender is a thing, there's male and female. And most of these issues, the actually American public supports. I would say on a more cynical level, America used to be a platform for prosperity, the protection of civil rights, the projection of women's rights and power and democracy abroad. And I would argue that it feels like a pretty quick transition to almost like I call it a kleptocracy, but America's become a platform for acquiring wealth and then leveraging that wealth as a means or a proxy of power. And the ultimate example of that was the launch of two meme coins, the Trump coin and the Melania coin.
I hate this guy so much. First of all, he thinks trading crypto is not a real job, so that permanently disqualified his own opinions in my eyes, for until he somehow proves otherwise.
The day before the presidency, such that this conversation could have already or might happen this week, and I'll finish here. President Trump, it's Vlad. We're thinking about stabilizing our currency or trying to stem the outflows of our reserves. So we're thinking about pulsing in about 600 billion rubles into the Trump coin, which, based on my economist estimation, would take the value of it to a 20 or $30 billion market cap, making you one of the wealthiest men in the world, Mr. Trump, and none of this would be disclosable or transparent. Also, in unrelated news, we'd really appreciate you seizing arms shipments to Ukraine. So I think we've gone kind of full kleptocracy, is the way I would describe it.
Are you optimistic, Scott?
Well, I'm a glass half empty kind of guy. I don't know if I'm just getting older, but no, I don't see a man convicted of sexual abuse or found liable who inspired an insurrection retaking the White House as a point of light for the American experience.
Constantine.
Fuck you too, Scott.
I suspect you'd have a slightly different view on all of the above. How are you feeling about everything that happened yesterday? Did you watch the inauguration? What is your big picture, 30,000 feet view?
I think it's incredibly unwise to make bold predictions about what's going to happen over the next 6 to 7 months. I do think what America had at the election and what the election of Donald Trump represents is something that we in the UK don't have, which is choice. They had a very clear choice between two very different perspectives on the world, between two very different approaches, between two very different candidates. And ultimately, criticisms of President Trump are necessary and legitimate, of course they are. But at the end of the day, I believe, having spent quite a lot of time in America around election time and also just generally, and traveling around real America, not just in DC and LA and New York, the reason that he was elected was that the American people are not prepared to accept what Europeans have decided they're prepared to accept, which is managed decline. The American people do not want their country to become weaker. They do not want it to become poorer. They do not want to impoverish their fellow citizens through net zero. What they want is their country to be great, their country to be powerful, their country to be influential. The economic realities for most Americans are not really reflected in the figures that we are told. So when people talk about inflation, the reality of people's lives on the ground is that their cost of living has gone up very, very significantly over the last few years. And that's not always reflected directly in the overall inflation figure that we're shown, because certain things are much more influential in people's lives than others. And so whether the decision to elect President Trump ends up being this positive thing for which there should be lots of optimism is a matter of the next 4 years. Are we going to see a presidency that really does everything it promises. And by the way, if you look at the things that Donald Trump is promising,
Our
I
Whig
think
ally, ladies and
whether you're
gentlemen.
left or right, you have to acknowledge that they are things that are worth doing. Having a secure border so that people don't come into your country illegally is a basic duty of government. Economic prosperity is a basic duty of government. Withdrawing America from a kind of simultaneously aggressive but weak posture around the world, where America sort of says, yeah, we're going to get involved in these foreign
Okay, so
conflicts.
Scott
but we're
was a
not actually
toxic
gonna
old
then
conservative
practically
blowhard.
help Ukraine
Now
win
we
that
have
war.
Constantine.
Is a kind of stupid
He's like a
position on both,
milquetoast
whichever side
liberal.
you're on.
Sometimes
So on all
useful,
of these
sometimes
things,
useless.
and of course,
No one can hear you.
Scott mentioned
I can't
wokeness.
hear
think
him, and I
he's
can't hear
absolutely
you.
right that there is a massive backlash happening around the world because lots and lots of people who were completely apolitical until the last 3 or 4 years, or maybe until 2016, just feel like the world has gone crazy, and suddenly they're supposed to pretend that men can change sex and become women, and now they're entitled to be in female prisons. And if your teenager says that they are the opposite sex, you're supposed to chop their breasts off, and all of this other stuff that ordinary people just look at and go, "This is crazy." Like, I am liberal, but this isn't liberal. This is some kind of weird thing that's going on. And I see the backlash against all of that all over the Western world, and I think Donald Trump signifies that people are fed up of that. And I have been warning for a very long time that if the woke left continues to exercise this level of influence on our public debate, the reaction will be the rise of the right. And Donald Trump is one of the most diplomatic and pleasant versions of what you're likely to get if the left keeps going crazy. We will see what challenges the world throws at him over the next 4 years, and whether he's capable of responding to them.
Scott, has the left lost its way, in your view? And if so, how did that happen? And just to respond on some of Konstantin's points about Trump being the best of a sort of right-wing collective, are we going to see right-wing sort of ideology spread throughout the Western world over the coming years? What's your take on all of the above?
You definitely, we Democrats, we get it right, and then we just go too damn far. And so I look at, I'm a professor on a campus. DEI, 60 years ago, there were 12 black people at Princeton, Yale, and Harvard combined. That was a problem. Race-based affirmative action makes sense. This year, more than half of Harvard's freshman class identifies as non-white. But 70% of those non-whites come from dual-income homes in the upper quintile of income-earning homes. The academic gap between black and white used to be double what it was between rich and poor. It's now flipped. So DEI was a good idea that, quite frankly, has gone insane, and now
Rewind.
this represents the same racism
That
that was
last
trying to.
statistic was not. I did not understand what the fuck he said.
But 70% of those non-whites come from dual-income homes in the upper
No, that was fine.
quintile of income-earning homes. The academic gap between black and white used to be double what it was between rich and poor. It's now flipped.
Pause. That's
So
the one.
DEI was,
What?
The education gap between black and white used to be double what it was between rich and poor, and now that has flipped.
Say it again.
Education gap between black and white used to be double the gap between rich and poor, but now that's flipped.
Rich and poor in general.
So, the amount more white people than black people that have educations used to be twice as much as the amount more rich people than poor people. But now, there's twice as much.
No, don't go into but now, because I still did not understand what you said before that.
So at first, there was twice as many. The gap of how many more whites than blacks got educations was twice as big of a gap as the gap between riches and poors.
So the gap between rich and poor used to be half of the size of the gap between
White and black.
white and black with degrees.
Statistically speaking, yes. but now it's
No, I don't need. I'm not ready for the but.
yeah.
So, okay, so rich were here, poor were here, okay, but white people with degrees were here, and black people with degrees were here.
It's hard because there's all these people aren't all on the same scale together in this, because we're talking about the differential percentages.
Okay, okay, this is my problem. There was no problem with the original. There is no problem with there being half of the gap. Why is that a problem? The gap
A
between
bigger race gap than an economic gap.
for degrees alone,
Yeah.
the economic gap was manageable. Okay, so you don't go shitting black
Well,
people into
in a fair society, which one would you have a bigger gap?
in the people with degrees or the big people with an income.
No. What would a fair society produce a larger gap in terms of who gets more educations? Would it be a larger race gap or a larger gap, or would the gap be larger in the
You're saying
rich
in a
versus
fair
poor?
society, which is better to determine whether or not you get a degree, your race or your income?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, your income. Why would your whether or not you can get a degree should not be predicated on your race at all? Like, just because you're a certain race does not mean.
Well, I wasn't talking about should. I was just talking about, like.
Okay, sure. So no.
I mean,
so,
I guess I kind of was talking about should, because I was talking about in a just society, but just so.
Okay, this is why that's stupid. It's because income should be the main thing that predicates whether or not you get a degree. Okay? And the income gap was closer than it seems. Or no, the income gap has gotten bigger now, right?
It's now twice as big as the race gap.
So, but the income gap was closer. So that was a better representation, actually, of who wants to go to college. Because now that the gap is bigger, people's opportunity to go to college, black people specifically, opportunity to go to college is less when it comes to being predicated by your income. It's only a higher number of black people in college because it's not predicated on your income at all, practically, whether or not you go. And you could be broke as fuck and go to college because you could just get in with government money. But before that was really a thing, then your income was the main determining factor in whether or not you would go to college. So the numbers before we did affirmative action were more actually representative of like
the reality.
What
Duh.
black people wanted to go to college.
That was the whole point of affirmative action. They hated reality.
But there was still the issue of like a part of the reality was gatekeeping being able to go to college from black people and other minorities because they were racist. That still needed to be addressed. But those people should have just been fired and replaced with people who wouldn't do that. Affirmative action was never necessary.
Affirmative action.
Not at least in the form that it was taken in. You could do affirmative action.
Just like
send extra scouts to black schools to scout for great academic students. That's how the affirmative action should have been.
Yeah, you should. You can do. There are ways to do affirmative action. That might even be too much, but I don't know.
I'm talking about when we started doing, when we decided we needed a fucking quota. We should, like, when he was talking about there was like 17 students between Harvard, Yale, blah, blah, blah. When we did, at that point, then what I'm talking about what I think was a good route to go down.
I think everything, that you could possibly think of to do for black people should have been done, but just not, I think to do it in a coercive way, I think that the Civil War was good, But then after that, we should have stopped trying to coerce people into living the right way, other than just don't break laws.
Yeah, respect human civil rights. Other than that, have at it.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I really do think the whole Scouts thing was the best route to go down then, because it's literally how all the colleges get their best athletes. So if you're looking for the best academics, use the same fucking method.
Well, and I also think, it would have been wise to invest in the building of educational institutions and so forth in the South and stuff like that.
Building? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I mean, I think they did that pretty much
They
already.
probably did do that.
It's not like there aren't colleges down there.
But I mean, specifically ones built with Northern money in order to help with integration.
I wonder if that's not just HBCUs.
That's probably, but my problem with it is my problem with all that kind of shit. My problem with HBCUs is like a descendant of my problem with George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and the frickin' Federal Bank. It's the constant tension between doing the right thing and the cost of doing the right thing.
You're gonna have to elaborate on that more if you want me to understand it.
Well, black people needed all sorts of things during Reconstruction. But there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of ways to get stuff for poor people that don't involve raising taxes and pointing guns at people and forcing them to do things. It would have been really cool to do stuff like that back then too.
No shit.
That's what I'm saying, okay?
Ever heard of fundraising?
Jesus Christ, right?
Just start a car wash.
Please and thank you. And the government, there's nothing stopping the government from doing that. That's what drives me the fucking crazy.
Sponsor the biggest fundraisers.
I'm trying to say.